What does the EU's antitrust allegations against SAP really mean? A MedTech firm warns of their impact from their ERP software switch, and the number one software proposal mistake that's costing companies millions. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 244 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 244. My name is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. This is the tech-agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformations, including people, process, technology, and strategy. So thank you for being here today. We are joined, as always, by our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excited for today's show. We've got a lot to cover here today. We're going to get into some social media questions. We're going to get into AI startup dual entry and just some lessons from that startup. We'll learn a little bit about it. And then we'll also talk about how a MedTech firm is warning of their negative impact from their ERP software switch and some of the lessons from that. We'll also bring on two guests for our interview later today. We'll bring on Marcus Harris and Scott Hayes, who are going to join me to talk about the EU's newly publicized antitrust allegations investigation into SAP. In particular, SAP's practices around third-party maintenance or their attempts to potentially stifle innovation and third-party options around support and maintenance for legacy SAP products. So that should be a really interesting conversation. And then last but not least, we'll get into the number one software proposal mistake that's costing companies millions and the mistakes you can avoid during your software evaluation and proposal review process, especially if you're going through an evaluation process right now. So before we get to all that, though, let's jump into some of the social media questions we received from our audience recently, Darian.
Yeah, so this first one today is, without a clear process for handling it, projects stall before they start. How many have you seen the data will be fine turn into a 6-month delay?
As far as whether or not it was a 6-month delay exactly or not, or 6 months or more, I couldn't really tell you. I'd say most of the time it probably is around 6 months or more, but it is extremely common. You know, a lot of times organizations, both the implementing companies and their system integrators and the software vendors, view data as an afterthought. They focus so much on just building the core, the technology, the new technology, that they oftentimes overlook and don't spend a lot of time on data, or they start data migration too late. And when I say data migration, it's not just the migration itself. It's also the data cleansing, the cleanup, the mapping, validating the data. That stuff takes a long time. And more often than not, that's usually a footnote in a set of assumptions that your vendor has given to you and you probably agree to as a implementing organization. So what I mean by that is a lot of times you'll have a statement of work from a vendor that says they're going to migrate the data, but customer shall be responsible for cleansing the data, mapping it, getting it ready and staging it for migration. And then the vendor will help you from there. So that might be literally one line item of a bulleted assumption in your SOW, but it can have months and millions of dollars of impact to your project. So it's a really important contractual provision to be aware of and understand that if you do have a provision like that, which you probably do, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to manage data? Typically the SI or the vendor isn't going to help you, and you may not want them to help you with it anyway, because you know your data better than anyone. So what are you going to do to clean up that data and get it ready for the new system? So that's the kind of stuff we have to think about as an organization when we're going through that process. But I agree with the person that made the comment for sure.
For sure. Yeah. And this next question today is, in my experience, aligning with leadership also involves aligning with key end users that report to leadership. Would you also consider a review of offerings from other providers to determine which provides the capabilities you need for your workflows?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and I think the person is touching on the importance of alignment, both above at the high level, the executive alignment, but also the end user and mid-level management alignment as well. It's important to make sure your entire organization is aligned from top to bottom. And in that process of getting aligned, oftentimes what you'll find is you go through the processes and you find that the software you have is imperfect. And I can assure you with 100% certainty that whatever software you're trying to deploy is not 100% perfect. And there is some percentage that is imperfect for you as a business, and that's okay. The question is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to address that risk? Are you going to, use a third-party bolt-on? Are you going to customize the software? Or are you going to force fit your processes into the technology itself? Or are you going to do some combination of all the above? And most companies do a combination of all the above, but they don't deliberately, proactively get ahead of that and start to map that out as part of their phase 0 implementation planning. So those are all reasons why you not only want to make sure that you have internal alignment before you get too far into the project, but also even more broadly speaking, you want to make sure you do that phase 0 implementation planning so you can address the hidden gotchas and surprises and pain points. You want to get that messy stuff out on the table as early as possible, partially so you can start mitigating those risks right away, but also so that you can have a realistic plan and a realistic timeline and budget for your project.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And this kind of leads us into our first newsworthy article of the day today. We have an interesting article today. It's about an AI startup, Dual Entry, that raised $90 million to deepen ERP market push. So with this, Dual Entry, the AI native ERP startup, has raised $90 million. This is their Series C funding. This is valuing the company now at $415 million. So the company aims to disrupt traditional ERP systems by using generative AI and autonomous data migration tools to drastically shorten implementation timelines. Its platform promises to mitigate historical financial data and workflows from legacy systems to modern ERP environment in just under 24 hours, which is obviously a huge change from month-long timelines that are common with SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft deployments. So Eric, with this speed of migration that Dual Entry is kind of talking about here, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think an AI-powered data migration tool like Dual Entry could change the economics of ERP replacement? Do you see this being a big disruptor?
Absolutely. Yes, and yes to both of your questions there. I think it is something that AI does have the potential to completely streamline and change data migration. We just talked about how it can have such a big impact on your overall implementation timeline, duration, cost, as well as risk. And it's, data migration is so important now, more than it's ever been. It's always been important, but it's even more important now in today's AI world where AI craves and needs really good data, and it needs lots of data. So if you can't get your legacy data into the new system, you're basically starting over and having to build some of that knowledge base that AI is going to need. And or if you bring the data over and it's corrupt or it's just not accurate, then your AI models are going to be wrong, and you're just largely wasting the money you invested in tools like AI. So I think using AI to help clean and migrate the data itself is something that's huge. I mean, it's just one of those things. If we can get that technical messiness off the table and have a better way to handle it, then we can spend more of our time focused on the people, process, and strategy parts of an implementation. And so I'm all for anything that really speeds up not just data migration, but also you think about configuration and development, customization, integration, all these really technical things that are important. I don't want to downplay them, but if AI can do that stuff for you or do it faster and cheaper, then you can use your resources, your humans that are going to be better at this other stuff anyway. Let them go focus on the people, the process, the strategy, the testing, the user adoption, all that stuff that's going to ultimately make or break your system. The data migration isn't going to make or break your system. You do have to do it, unfortunately. It's a necessary evil, but it's all the other stuff that's ultimately going to make your project succeed or fail.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, how might traditional ERP vendors like SAP or Oracle respond to this kind of disruption?
I think the vendors themselves are probably okay with it. I think the services side of SAP and Oracle, and certainly, especially among the big system integrators and the bigger consultancies, I think they're going to not like it as much because it's a threat to their traditional business model. Because, if you're a big company and you hire a big consultancy with, dozens or hundreds of people on your project, a lot of those people are going to be offshore development types of people that are doing things like data migration. lower value but high margin for the system integrator, but it's just added cost and time to the client. So it's going to help customers for sure. It's probably going to hurt the big implementers, especially in the short term. And so, right there, you've got another conflict of interest, as if there wasn't already enough conflicts of interest between customers and their vendors and system integrators. But that's just going to exacerbate that conflict of interest now to where, they might resist using an AI tool like that because it's threatening or jeopardizing their bread and butter and their whole business model. If you think about it, their whole business model is built on bringing mass armies of people, especially junior, low-level, low-cost people that they can mark up with a really good margin. That's how they make most of their money. And if they were to say, hey, I'm going to just automate all that, I mean, they have to be willing to say, I'm willing to take the hit short term, maybe in the long term, to change my business model entirely. And I just don't know that they're ready to do that. I don't know if they ever will be, just because they're so big. There's so much at stake, and there's so many people that will be negatively affected in the short term by that. So I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, actually, but it seems like it's just human nature that they're going to protect their turf and protect their old legacy way of doing business.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last question with this: does faster implementation necessarily translate to better transformation outcomes?
No, and I would say faster transformation on a technology side doesn't even necessarily lead to faster true transformation. So what I mean is, like, now we've got all these tools now that can compress the technology time frame to do different things like develop software, migrate data, do the integration, all that stuff. Sure, we're going to be able to compress that timeline now, but your overall change, your overall ability to consume the change and operationalize it and get business value out of it, I don't see a world where AI is going to make that much better. It's still going to take you time to get people to use new software. Now, there will be incremental improvements. I think AI can help with things like building user adoption materials, for example. That was largely a manual process that our team would have to do. And now we've got tools that allow us to do that faster and do more of it. So user adoption might be an area where, okay, AI is going to enable that faster, but the people themselves aren't going to be able to change as fast as we can implement technology. And I don't think AI is really going to change that anytime soon. So yes, technology work streams will speed up. They should speed up, and you hope to see that. But I think what will happen is that will also create even more unrealistic expectations that now we've sped up the technology work stream. Doesn't that mean our overall project is going to go faster? Chances are it's not going to go any faster. In fact, it might actually go slower because the technology is so advanced now, and it's such a big jump from where most companies are today to where they're headed in the future. So I think that chasm, or that jump they're making from as is to be, that's going to extend the timeline overall, even though the technical work stream within a broader transformation is being compressed, presumably or hypothetically.
Yeah, those are some great points for sure. And it leads us nicely into our second newsworthy article of the day here, which has to do with a company implementing a new software and the effects that they saw from that. So with that, Zimmer Biomet is a global medical technology company specializing in orthopedic implants and surgical products, announced that its recent ERP software rollout has disrupted operations and impacted revenue. The company cited the production and shipment delays tied to its transition to the new SAP enterprise system, causing investor concern and a temporary dip in their stock value. Some key takeaways from this was the ERP transition fallout. So the company's move to the new SAP system temporarily slowed their processing, inventory management, and fulfillment, illustrating how even well-resourced enterprises face operational risk during system cutovers. The financial impact from Zimmer Biomet lowered the quarterly revenue guidance due to rollout issues, with that nearly 5% dip as investors reacted to operational disruption. And I think another point from this article that they shared was that this is just a common pain point that different companies can experience. So ERP-related slowdowns are not necessarily unique to Zimmer Biomet. And I know, Eric, you can talk more to that as well. But similar challenges have affected large-scale rollouts in manufacturing, retail, healthcare, where complex supply chain depend on real-time data flows. So with this, Eric, what can other manufacturers learn from what Zimmer Biomet is experiencing with their ERP rollout challenges?
Well, it's a good question. And actually, I have a YouTube video that will be published probably in 1 to 2 weeks from the time this episode is released. And it dives into this case study a little bit more detail, this particular one, because it was such a massive impact to the business results or their operations. The valuation dropped $2 billion. Their revenue dropped, I think, 1 to 1.5% as a result of their ERP project. And they publicized this to the public. So it wasn't anything. This isn't inside information that only we have. This is well documented public information. But I think it's a good lesson that these projects are painful and you've got to manage them better than your vendors are probably going to. A lot of times in projects like these, the client or the vendor will tell you that, hey, we're ready. Let's go. We're ready to go live. We did our part. So let's just go live. But I think it's ultimately up to you, the customer, to say, no, we're not. Potentially, we're not ready. Yeah, the technology might be ready, but chances are pretty high it's not, by the way. A lot of times the technology is not built the way you need it to, but in their minds, it's built in a way that works, but it may not work for your business. So connecting those dots takes time, and you have to be the one that's willing to take on that risk and recognize what the risk is, because this is a stark reminder that this isn't just about, oops, we spent more time and money than we thought on this implementation. It's, oops, not only did we do that, but bigger oops, we just lost $2 billion of valuation of our company, and our sales are down 1.5%, all as a result of a failed ERP implementation. So forget the $1 to $200 million of annual business benefits that were projected in that business case. By the way, that same business case, they were told by, I can't remember if it was Deloitte or SAP or whoever sold them SAP, told them that you will get $1 to $200 million of benefits. They didn't get that benefit. In fact, they lost revenue and they lost profit as a result. So I think you just have to recognize that there is a huge amount of risk, and it's up to you, not your vendor, not your system integrator. You can't trust them or depend on them to mitigate that risk for you.
To go off of that and to expand into that even further, how can organizations better balance innovation with the operational continuity during ERP transitions?
Well, I think first is don't do a big bang. If you want to minimize risk, don't do one big, massive, big bang. The second thing would be to make sure you go through the full cycles of user acceptance, business testing, not technical testing, business testing. Make sure you've gone through all the different scenarios that are critical to your business. Make sure you've done all the training, that you work through all the issues of what people's jobs are going to look like, how they're going to do their job, all that stuff. So I think that stuff will minimize risk. But as far as how you do it and how you promote innovation, I think you can be actually, the more structured you are and the more governance you have in your project, the more innovative you can be. I think there's a difference between innovation and reckless innovation. I think reckless innovation would be, let's just build some stuff and let's just go live and let people start using it and see what happens. Well, that's what Zimmer Biomet did, and we saw what happened. They lost business value, they lost sales, they lost profit, all that stuff. People, they had to lay off a bunch of people as a result of the financial issues that ensued. So that's not innovation. That's just recklessness. So it's a fine line between recklessness and innovation. I think the way to be innovative is to do it in a box, contain it, like test it, try it on a small scale. When it fails, which it will, minimize that risk, make sure it's not spread to the entire organization. And when it succeeds, then scale that. Don't scale the problem, scale the good thing. So there's ways around it, but you have to be smart about it, and you have to have really solid project governance. So ironically, the way to have more innovation is to be more structured and more disciplined in the way you approach these projects.
Yeah, that's a super great point. I love the way that you phrased that. One last question with this article: could a stronger focus on change management and user adoption mitigate these impacts that they had, or was it just rolled out completely wrong?
It's probably a bit of both. I suspect, and we don't have all the details of what did or didn't happen, or how the methodology they pursued, all that stuff. But if I had to base this on other failures we've seen in our expert witness practice and our project recovery practices, I'd say that chances are pretty high that the project, the change management probably didn't happen. And I imagine it wasn't very effective, but a lot of times it's not effective because they haven't done the foundational stuff, like design their business processes and define what the change impacts are and think about how roles and responsibilities are going to look in the future state environment. And when you haven't done those things, it's impossible for your change management team to be successful. So I'm just going to speculate here and say it's probably a combination of all the above, but the root cause, even though change management may have been a problem, it may have actually been even more fundamental than that, which is the core things that needed to happen in a project didn't happen. Therefore, the change management team couldn't have been successful. So that'd be my assumption or hypothesis based on what we've seen with other similar looking failures that we've helped clean up with our clients in the past.
For sure. And I'm sure your YouTube video too in a few weeks will be great for different insights into this case study as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to sharing that with the audience here, and keep an eye out on my YouTube channel. You'll see that here in the next, I think it's 1 to 2 weeks from now. You'll see it. So love to share that with you and get your feedback on that as well. So good stuff. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to get into our first set of guests here. Our first guest, which is Scott and Marcus. Scott Hayes from Rimini Street, Marcus Harris from Taft Law. They're going to be on the show here talking about the European Union's antitrust allegations against SAP. They're actually doing an investigation into SAP and looking into whether or not they've, embarked or used anti-competitive behavior here in the, not only in the EU, but across the world. There's some similar business practices that are being used, not just in the EU, but in throughout the world. And so the EU is investigating it now, trying to figure out if there are anti-competitive behaviors happening there. So we're going to dive into that here in just a moment. And then later in the show, we'll get into the number one mistake you might be making with your software proposals that you might be receiving from your vendors. So be sure to stick around. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed.
I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent, technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed, never stressed. Got that sunshine on my
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 244. My name is Eric Kimberly, here with Darian Chwialkowski, and you can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, which is an independent, tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And we've got a great guest here lined up for you. It is two guests, actually, Scott Hayes from Rimini Street and Marcus Harris from Taft Law. We're going to dive into this case study, this real-life newsworthy topic / case study of the European Union. The regulatory body within the European Union is investigating SAP for potential antitrust behavior. We're going to talk about what that means for SAP, what it means for people that work in the SAP community, and more importantly, what it means for SAP customers and even non-SAP customers. I think this is a case that's going to have a lot of ripple effect here throughout the entire enterprise tech space. So it's really important for the entire, enterprise technology industry to understand this, because this is a huge deal. And I think it will end up being a huge deal for years and decades to come. So it's really important to understand what's happening here. So with all that being said, let's dive into the conversation. And Scott and Marcus, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'm happy to be here. Nice to see you again, Scott. I'm an attorney at Taft, Stettinius and Hollister. I'm in the Chicago office. I've practiced in this space, in the enterprise software space, for over 20 years. I started my career working in-house at SAP, worked in-house at Infor, and now regularly draft and negotiate software-related agreements, including maintenance and support documents, PSAs, MSAs, SOWs, and then what's unusual about my practice is I litigate these big transformation failures when they go sideways in courts and before arbitration panels across the country. And so I think this is a huge issue, and I'm excited to talk about it with you.
Yeah, you're really curious to get your perspective on this. You and I haven't had time to talk about this even offline, so this will be a real live unpacking of this for the first time for at least you and I. And then, of course, we have Scott Hayes from Rimini Street. So tell us a little bit about yourself from Rimini Street, if you don't mind, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, and good morning, Marcus. Good to see you again. I have been at Rimini Street for several years, but for decades before that, I've been working in the enterprise software space, particularly in ERP and in some customer experience areas as well. And I brought that experience to Rimini Street, where I'm happy to be part of this third-party support capability. I don't know if I want to call it an industry necessarily, but this alternative to vendor support that is giving clients choice. And we'll get into that as we talk today, but I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this topic.
Absolutely. Yeah, appreciate you both being here, especially on relatively short notice. We planned this relatively quickly just around this newsworthy topic. So appreciate you guys both joining. And one quick question for the audience, two-part question. One is I'd love to see where you're joining from today. So if you don't mind dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from today, love to get some context of where you are in the world. And of course, different parts of the world are going to have different regulations at some point around all this third-party stuff. As well as other nuances in these local markets. So we'd love to see where you're joining from today. And secondly, let us know what you think of third-party maintenance. Do you know are you aware of it? Are you using it? We'd love to get any feedback you have around third-party maintenance. And I'm actually going to start there, and maybe just a backup for those that don't know. And it is fascinating to me how many people don't realize this, but when an organization deploys a product like an SAP or an Oracle or Microsoft, whatever the case may be, oftentimes there are third-party support options. You don't necessarily have to get support and maintenance from your direct software vendor. You have third-party options. Now, whether or not the software vendors want you to go use a third-party support option is a different story. It's a different conversation. I would argue that most of the time they would prefer you don't, and in many cases they'll make you think that you can't, and that's really the heart of this whole case here. And I'll ask Marcus to unpack the case here in just a moment. The reason I bring this all up, though, is because I do liken this much to like buying a car. If you buy a new car, you can take your car to the dealership to get your oil changed and do whatever service you need, but you also have hundreds or thousands of other choices of mechanics and service providers that will change your oil or fix your car, whatever you need. You don't have to go to the dealership. And so in my mind, that's kind of how I view this whole third-party maintenance and support thing. You don't have to use third-party support, but you also don't have to use the vendor support either. And the question is, should you have the right to? Should the vendors have more control or less control over it? That's all the stuff we're going to get into here today. So I'd love to hear any knee-jerk reactions the audience has to this whole thread here as we get going. But as we're digging into this, Marcus, can you tell us just a little bit, like help us understand what is this case? Like from a legal perspective, what are the allegations and what's at stake here? And why is the EU sticking their nose in this? I guess would be the place to start.
Yeah, well, to premise this, I mean, this is EU specific, right? And certainly I'm a U.S. attorney, but from a kind of general background perspective and looking at the allegations and summaries of these allegations and given my industry know-how and how SAP operates from a contractual perspective, this is a major investigation by the European Union into what it sees as claims of anti-competitive behavior. And so they're looking at this from an antitrust perspective, focusing on SAP's practices around maintenance and support for on-prem software systems. And so the question at issue is really has SAP exploited its market dominance to restrict competition and impose unfair conditions on its customers regarding their ability to get support and maintenance for those legacy on-prem business systems from third-party providers. And so, I mean, what's significant about this is it's really the first formal antitrust investigation of SAP that ever. There have been questions since at least 2022 when regulators were asking SAP customers about their ability to switch support providers for the SAP software. But this is the first time it's really bubbled up and become a major issue. And I think if you look at the history of SAP and its contractual practices in restricting customer choice, to me, and I think you brought it up a second ago, I mean, it's really surprising that it's taken this long for this to come to fruition for them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I guess I'm curious, and this would be pure speculation on your part, and which is always the last thing an attorney wants to be asked is something to speculate on. And by the way, I will say that everything we're talking about here today is not legal advice. We're not here to give legal opinions necessarily. We're just here to talk about from an industry perspective what's going on here and what does it mean to buyers. But Why do you think, or if you had to speculate, why do you think the EU would have picked third-party support as an area to hone in on? Because, like you said, and like I agree with it, there's decades of weird, sketchy stuff that has happened in this industry. It's not anything necessarily new. So why now? Like, if you had to speculate what that is, what are your thoughts there?
I think it's a confluence of a few things. One is that these practices, like you said, are sketchy, right? And while they have been going on for years, they're now coinciding with this incredible push by SAP to force its customer base to adopt their cloud solutions. And so there's now this restrictive scheme that's being placed on them that, okay, if you're not going to move to the cloud, you can still be on your software system, but it's not going to be supported anymore. And if you look at your contractual restrictions, the intellectual property provisions in that agreement, you actually are prevented. These are the allegations, that you are actually prevented from utilizing any third-party support without violating your contract or violating SAP's intellectual property rights in its software. And so the stakes are incredibly high. You're essentially being forced into this move to the cloud because you have no other option. So they're holding their customers hostage. And I think, in some ways, this is a self-inflicted wound. It's these aggressive practices that really, to be honest with you, have always been in place contractually. And I hope we can talk about how they do this. But then you couple it with the incredible push to get everybody to move to the cloud. And then you look at that this is happening in Europe, where SAP is a dominant player in the European marketplace. So, I mean, all those things are working together to force the EU's hand in some respects.
Yeah. And I want to ask you a follow up to that, Scott, just to talk more from the perspective of the history of Rimini and what need you were trying to fill, or how you guys recognized early on the need or opportunity to offer this third-party support and maintenance. But before I come back to you real quickly, I just want to turn to the audience here and thank people that are commenting here. We've got Steve Perry joining from Lexington, Kentucky. I'm assuming that's not the Steve Perry from Journey, but if you are, please let me know, because I'm a huge Journey fan. And then we've got Karen from London. That's where I am today. So thank you for joining, Karen. Thanks for being here today. John from Germany is joining here on YouTube, says that yes, third-party maintenance is being used due to a fixed contract that apparently that he has with his organization. We've got John joining from Kenya, working as an SAP consultant. So I'd love to hear your feedback, John, as an SAP consultant. I'd love to hear your perspective of what do you think? I mean, what do you think this means? Is it, and I know you probably have to toe the company line to some degree if you work for SAP directly, but would love to hear your feedback on what you think about from the customer perspective here. And then we have someone from Pembroke Pines, Florida joining, although I can't see the name. So thank you everyone who's commented so far on where you're joining from. Really appreciate you joining here today. So Scott, turning to you for a moment, tell us a bit, and again, I'm trying to back up. On one hand, I want to dive right in and get into this, but on the other hand, I want to back up and make sure people understand the landscape here. Rimini Street offers third-party support and maintenance for SAP and other solutions too, not just SAP. Tell us how you guys, what's your philosophy on what need were you trying to fill? How did you guys recognize that this was a thing or an opportunity? What problem are you trying to fill for customers? Tell us a little bit about the history of Rimini and how you guys got to it.
Sure. So Rimini Street was founded in 2005. So we turned 20 years old this fall. And we've been providing third-party support for, like you say, SAP, Oracle, more recently VMware, as an alternative to the vendor support. So kind of going back to the way that most enterprise software contracts were established in that time frame, is there were separate contracts for the right to use the software and for the ongoing maintenance of the software. And the right to use the software was a perpetual license. So you paid for it once, like you bought your car. You weren't leasing it. You bought it outright. You had the title to it. You bought the right to use your license into perpetuity. And then every year you had the opportunity to subscribe to annual support and maintenance from the vendor. And typically, it was priced at somewhere around 20, 22, 23% of what the perpetual license cost was. So it wasn't an insignificant expense. And it's really necessary for an enterprise of any size to have that maintenance and support for a couple of reasons, for several reasons. One, this is, it's really the core digital heartbeat of your company. It's where you're operating to get things done in the company and recording those transactions and reporting on those transactions. And it's the way that we keep records for our businesses. And as part of that, it was important for clients to remain number one, secure. They had to know that their data and their systems were secure, so that today, tomorrow, et cetera, they were going to be working and there wasn't going to be any kind of breach. So it's important to have it secured. It's important to have it stable. It's working. I got people on the shop floor. I got people in the field. I need to make sure that software is stable and working and doing the job I need it to do. It needs to be performant, and it needs to be compliant with whatever the regulations are, tax, legal, regulatory compliance in the jurisdictions in which my company is operating. So that was all part of the maintenance agreement. The vendor would provide patches for known vulnerabilities in the security space. They would provide tax, legal, and regulatory updates as needed, particularly in the areas of finance and human capital management, human resources. Payroll is where those tax, legal, and regulatory issues came up. E-invoicing in many, many countries is a regulatory requirement. And so Rimini Street said, we understand all of that and what's important to clients to keep their software stable, secure, performant, and compliant. But the software vendors were charging a lot of money for that. And our founder felt that the delivery of that service experience when something goes wrong was subpar, and that there was an opportunity to provide a higher level of service and a broader level of service with a more responsive model. So Rimini Street started with offering that same annual software support at up to 50% off what the vendor was charging. But what came with that was a more responsive kind of a support experience, direct access to engineers who could help resolve issues, as well as security solutions that would help proactively mitigate risk, interoperability solutions that could help the software continue to operate in environments for many years, and tax, legal, and regulatory updates to make sure to help our clients remain compliant. And it was really that cost and the service experience that were driving it. But there was one more thing, and that was freedom in a roadmap perspective. So you've mentioned already, and Marcus has mentioned that SAP imposes deadlines on support. And that was happening all across the industry. Vendors typically would only want to provide support services for the latest release, or one back or two back, kind of that. It's a rolling support deadline. And SAP is still doing that. And we believe, and I think most of the practitioners believe, that the life and value of enterprise software is a lot longer than the vendors are willing to support. So this need to upgrade just to remain supported was completely artificial from our perspective. And we wanted to give our clients a much longer roadmap on the software that was already working and had no really material reason to change. And so at the very beginning, we said, we'll not only do those things I just mentioned, but we'll also support your existing release for up to 15 years or more. And then you can move forward on your timetable.
Yeah, it's really interesting, fascinating. And it's, it's funny because you talk about this and it sounds so innovative on one hand, but on the other hand, you're like, it just makes sense. It's kind of a no-brainer. Like, why would you not have other options to provide that sort of third-party alternative? I want to ask you a follow-up question to that, Marcus, here in a moment, but want to just get to the audience real quickly. Steve Perry confirms that he is not with Journey, unfortunately. But thank you for being here anyway, Steve. I really do appreciate having you here. So he is not here. We have someone joining from Belgium and others joining as well. So thank you for that. I want to ask the audience a quick question before I ask Marcus this next one. But I want to hear from the audience, even though we're early in this conversation. Just give me a yes or no. Do you think customers should have the right to go outside of their core software vendor to get third-party maintenance? Just give me a yes or no. I'm just curious to get a knee-jerk reaction from you so far, knowing that we're going to dive into this more. You may or may not change your opinion after this, but we'd love to get your feedback. So let us know what you think in the comments wherever you're watching today. But Marcus, I want to get back to something that Scott just said and then something you said and bring it together. I'm playing devil's advocate here. So you made the comment earlier that a lot of times vendors will, and one of the allegations here from the EU is that SAP is putting in contracts or language in their contracts that state you cannot go get third-party maintenance and support. You can't use a third party. In some cases, they have language like that, I think is what you said. There's also another piece of this too, which is around, just lost my train of thought. It was around the back penalties. So if for some reason someone said, I'm going to cancel my SAP maintenance through SAP for 2 years, let's say, and I decide I'm going to go to Rimini Street. And then for some reason I decide, you know what, I'm going to stop at Rimini Street and go back to SAP for whatever reason. Because again, I have freedom of choice, right? So I might go back to SAP. What SAP is doing is saying, okay, that's great. You can come back, but you need to pay us for those 2 years. You didn't pay us that you were paying Rimini Street. So that's another piece of the anti-competitive allegation that they're making. But to play devil's advocate, you mentioned it, that in the contract, there's oftentimes language that supports their right to do that. So I guess the question is, even if something is super sketchy and weird and unethical, but you agree to it in a contract, what does that mean to a buyer? Is that something you should just be like, oh, it's no big deal because it's unethical, so it'll get thrown out of court? Or should you say, you know, I'm going to push back on this and I'm going to get that struck from the contract if I can? And what if they won't remove it from the contract? Just help us unpack that a bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, that's a very bad strategy for anybody negotiating a contract, is to agree to something and then say, well, it's not going to be enforceable because it's unethical. That is a recipe for disaster. But let's be clear about what SAP is specifically doing, because I'm not sure I was clear. There is not an express prohibition, as far as I know, and certainly not in the contracts that I have seen, that just outright prevents you from using a third party for support. Okay, that would be clearly.
That's really important. Though. I want to make sure, because I misspoke then, if that's what you're saying, because I wasn't aware of that. So it sort of actually fits better than what I was thinking, is that I didn't know they had that clause in their contract. So it sounds like maybe they don't necessarily.
Right, and one of the users here, or viewers, Rama Krishna, asked this question. So, well, we've always used third-party support. I never knew this was prohibited, and it's not necessarily prohibited. And that's where the EU is coming in, and they're saying, okay, well, these practices are anti-competitive. And what are the practices? And one of them is just what you said. It's charging a high reinstatement and back maintenance fees when the customer comes back. And so oftentimes, sure, you can suspend your maintenance or support for a period of time, but when you reinstate it, you've got to pay all the back fees that would have been due for the time that you were in that suspended period. And many times it's at whatever the current rate for, Scott was talking about the percentage, 20, 25, 23, whatever it is, maybe you started at 15 and you've been off for 7 years and now it's at 23, you're going to, be assured they're going to get the most out of you that they possibly can. And so, is that unethical? Is that unconscionable? That's what's really at issue here. The other things that they do is, the other things that SAP does, they'll routinely extend your license term, or not your license term, but your support term. So these things automatically renew unless you say, hey, we don't want to do it. You miss it, and now you've got another 5-year term, or whatever it is, just by way of example. And so, those provisions are what the EU is looking at and what is deemed to be problematic. So do they outright prevent you from going to somebody else? Not necessarily. And they couple that with some restrictive provisions in their confidentiality clauses, in their intellectual property clauses. So, some of the allegations, you look at the Tomorrow Now lawsuit from Oracle, it's that, the copyrights were actually infringed by this third-party support provider. And so that's another way they get you. okay, or you've now accessed confidential proprietary information in violation of the contract. So those provisions are much closer to outright prohibitions because of the way they operate. But you have these other provisions where you've got to pay back maintenance and the like, and automatic renewals. Those are problematic as well, but they're not as prohibitive necessarily, but they're still anti-competitive, arguably.
Yeah, there are a couple of things I might tag on here, Eric. We've been supporting SAP clients legally for many, many years. Over 1,000 SAP clients have come to Rimini Street for third-party support without legal issue there. I think these practices aren't so much, complete stonewall legal blockade of third-party support as much as they are, we're going to make it hurt. We're gonna perhaps elongate the initial contract term in which vendor support is required. We're going to talk about paying back maintenance, which is really an interesting and odd topic because they want you to pay for something you weren't getting, right? They want you to pay for support that wasn't delivered by the vendor during the time that the third-party support provider was providing it. So that's an odd one. And frankly, we have seen some of our clients choose to go back to the vendor without having to pay back maintenance. I think that's part of the negotiation. I think there's often a couple of things at play with the vendor. One of them is we'd love to have you back, or we'd love to have you where we can, continue to charge maintenance fees into the future and sell you more of our products. And so we have sometimes seen a client go back to, say, SAP to get another product, and they're welcome back, and they negotiate just like any other prospect would for SAP at that time, and SAP, would be happy to sell them something new.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if vendors were to truly play the long game, they would recognize that, that's the way to do it is to create an enticing reason for people to want to come back. And, I don't think, quite frankly, I don't think SAP would have to force their customers into S/4HANA if it was such a great product and it was such a slam dunk and such a, why are we having this conversation is my question. I mean, this seems like there's something else going on here. And I think if we're being candid here, I think the problem is people don't want to move to S/4HANA. Most SAP customers have not yet moved. And so they're looking at companies like you, Scott, and says, let's go to Rimini Street and extend the life cycle of this big, huge, massive investment we already made. Why are we going to make another one when we can't justify the business value necessarily?
Yeah, if it's working, it's doing its job, and it'll continue doing its job on Monday morning and next year. Why can't we stay on it? And by the way, we've customized it a lot, and to move with those customizations might be even more costly. And so, we see clients just wanting to continue operating what they have paid for, what they have a perpetual license for a longer period of time.
I'm here with Marcus and Scott talking about the EU's antitrust investigation of SAP, what that means to the industry. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
How can you see into my eyes like open doors?
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we publish. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that'll allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 244. My name is Eric Kimberly, here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com, and the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, produced by Major Talk Productions. So if you'd like to reach out to us to learn more about how Third Stage Consulting can help with your project, I've included my contact information below. Or if you'd like to learn more about how to collaborate with us on this podcast and other content we create, reach out to Major Talk Productions. I've included contact information below as well. So we're in the midst of our conversation here with Scott and Marcus talking about the EU's antitrust investigation into SAP. I want to come to you, Marcus, because I know I don't think you mentioned it in your intro today, but I know you've mentioned it on this podcast in the past, and I know this about you, that you're an IP attorney, intellectual property attorney. And I think about, I look at these companies, and we have a lot of clients that are in this boat where they have spent so much money and time perfecting and fine-tuning SAP ECC or whatever legacy system they have. And I know customization is a bad word. No one wants to do it. We all want the clean core, standard off-the-shelf software. That's all a load of garbage. That's not going to happen for most organizations.
Right.
So set that aside for a moment. You have to, you're going to have to tailor the solution to fit your needs if you're of any sort of complexity or depth or whatever. But the reason I'm bringing this up is I feel like companies are being stiff-armed or they're being forced in some ways into getting rid of this intellectual property they built, which is in some ways their secret sauce. They've built ECC in a way that supports their business better. And now they're being asked just to move over to S4HANA, do a clean core, get rid of the customization. First of all, it's highly risky and unrealistic. Second of all, why would you throw out all that IP and just defer to SAP? Because SAP gods must have the better answer than we do on how to run our business. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I've got a lot of thoughts on that. I mean, I think you both are right. I mean, you've got a highly customized, modified, configured system that's worked well for you. You've got a perpetual license to continue using it perpetually. Why are you going to move to the cloud when, in many cases, all the functions and features of that on-prem software are not incorporated yet, or not incorporated in the same way as they are in the cloud system, and you lose, what may very well be your secret sauce or your competitive advantage, because now you're on the same system that all your competitors are using with minimal modifications or customizations, understanding that, everybody wants to customize, and they largely do. But, the value proposition is challenging. And that's not making any comment on whether S4HANA is a good system or not, but just in general, I mean, that's not a great option for most people. And then you couple that with the strong arm tactic, arguably, right, of being prevented through contractual provisions on disclosure of proprietary information, confidential information, the risk of a lawsuit because of somebody modifying the intellectual property or copyright issues, that all becomes untenable in some ways. And what are you supposed to do as a customer? And I think there's a comment here that SAP is going to get maybe a little bit of a black eye from this if they continue these aggressive, what are perceived as aggressive tactics.
Yeah, I think the customization argument is really interesting, and without opening a can of worms, some people call it technical debt or legacy. I don't like to use either of those words. If the customization is, like you say, Marcus, part of their differentiation, part of what makes them, then we want to treat that as just as important as the code that came directly from the vendor. So part of our model from the beginning was to say, hey, when we onboard you, we totally understand the version of SAP you're on, but we want to understand your customizations, because we're going to take on the responsibility for supporting those customizations going into the future. We treat that as part of their entire environment and their need to operate their business in the way that they do. And there are ways to take those customizations with you to the cloud in a couple of ways. One, you can do what's called bring your own license, and just you're going to move out of your data center but you're going to move to a public cloud facility, a hosted facility where they're just running the servers for you, but you're bringing your license, you're bringing your software, you're bringing your customization. Some people call that a lift and shift. Fine, right? It's just an IP address. We can, make sure that we support you wherever that is running. The bigger issue, I believe, is not so much the move to the cloud, but it's the relinquishing of the perpetual licenses and moving to a subscription model where now my right to use the software and my support for the software and possibly some other services related to the operations of that software are all bundled into a single agreement. And it will be very, very difficult to extract any one part of it or to get out of it entirely at some point in the future, because the minute I want to break one of that, it might affect my right to use the software because I'm paying for it on a subscription basis rather than bringing my perpetual license with me.
That's a really good point.
It is, and I always think about, I haven't seen this yet, but I do wonder at some point in the future it's going to happen with some big company. It's going to become a big deal where they run into financial turmoil and whatever, the cash flow sucks, so they can't pay their SAP bill. Then they have to choose between, do I let them shut off my system or do I maybe not make payroll? And to me, that's just a weird position to put any company in, because like you're at the mercy of your software vendor now when you have these conditions where you don't own it, you're leasing it essentially. And now that's a whole nother can of worms. I suppose we could spend a whole hour talking about the ethics of that and whether or not that's right. I have very strong opinions, you might imagine, on that, but we won't dive into it today. But I want to get to this question here, this comment here that I think it summarizes this pretty well. This is from John on LinkedIn. John says customers made a massive investment in SAP R3 and ECC, expecting a long, stable life cycle with annual maintenance. Forcing a migration to an entirely new platform feels like moving the goalposts and could be seen as a breach of the initial partner. And I suppose he goes on to talk about how ending support for the very products that made them dominant, SAP risks being seen as in the corner, damaging the trust that is essential for the long-term enterprise relationships. And that's the comment you were referring to, Marcus. And I think that's true. I mean, I have not seen a vendor be this brazen and take their customers for granted as much as SAP is right now. I mean, I cannot believe it, honestly. It fascinates me. I thought I'd seen it all in this industry, and now you see stuff like this, and you're like, I can't believe SAP thinks that this is okay and that people are just going to follow along because this is SAP. I think this will ultimately be SAP's downfall. I don't think they'll be the massive number one player they are for much longer as a result of it, because we just see so many pissed off clients, and I don't think they understand or care that their customers are this pissed off. But they are very pissed, and they're coming to us trying to figure out ways to get around it. They're not to the point yet where they're ready to throw out SAP, but I can't see this being a sustainable model for them. It might be fine for the next 5 years, and their stock price is doing great right now. I just don't think it's going to last much longer. And then I want to also get to some other comments here. I asked the question earlier, yes or no, do you think customers should have the right to use third-party maintenance or not? And so far, we're 3-0 on yeses. So John on YouTube says yes. Steve on LinkedIn says yes, and Rama on LinkedIn says yes as well. So 3-0 on yeses so far. But love to hear your thoughts. Anyone who
Can I vote? Can I vote?
I'd love to hear what your vote is. What is it? Just in case I don't want to assume anything, Scott. But
let's make it a yes.
Okay, got it. So we're 4-0. And Marcus, what's yours?
I would say yes as well. And I mean, the way I look at this is, it's a hard argument for SAP because, excuse me, you've got a scenario on the front end with integrators, right? I mean, SAP has its own professional services organization, and they want you to utilize them, but they've got this whole network of integrators and partners that implement and configure their software, and it's been that way forever. Why can't it be the same way on the back end with maintenance support? I mean, it's so you got to argue. Well, if there's no intellectual property issue on the front end when people are configuring and modifying the code, how can there possibly be one on the back end when people are merely providing support for the system? I mean, it's a bad place to be. And I think the implications for the broader industry are pretty impactful, right? I mean, I think you're going to have a lot more customer choice. You're going to be able to have the ability to choose the support provider that you want. You're going to have more innovation, cheaper prices. So I think ultimately it should be a good thing. And the question is, what's going to happen to SAP, right? I mean, if they're found to have violated EU antitrust laws, regulations, what's the penalty going to be? And we've seen huge penalties for Meta, Facebook, Microsoft, come out of the EU. And so, I can't predict the future, but I mean, I think, SAP is a little bit compromised here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Microsoft and Facebook, Google as well. Some of these consumer big tech companies have had issues with the EU in the past and have had to settle big time allegations with the EU in the past. And this stuff goes back 10 or 20 years when Google and Microsoft were fighting the EU over anti-competitive behavior. And I think the difference, though, is that they're big tech companies that are consumer facing, whereas SAP has gotten away of flying under the radar, being B2B, and regulators and people in general just don't feel as bad for businesses when they get screwed as they do for individuals. And so I understand why regulators are ahead of it on the consumer facing side. But now we're seeing the EU dip into the B2B side of things. I think we should all be a little worried about that, because I think if any sort of regulator, especially a big regulator like the EU or the US government, were to dive in and really peel back the layers of the onion and look under the hood of what happens in the space, I think we're going to be in a world of hurt. When I say we, I don't mean the three of us. I think the big software vendors, the big system integrators, I think you look at some of their behavior, and now I wonder, like, how much could you extend what they're saying about this one isolated case with SAP and third-party maintenance? What does that mean, for example, even just SAP's forced migration to S/4HANA? Is that antitrust behavior or monopolistic by saying you have to get off your old system now or else we're going to cut off support and you need to move to S/4HANA? And by the way, we're not going to put any more R&D dollars over here. We're only putting it over here. And by the way, it's going to cost you more longer term. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you can answer that, Marcus, at the risk of asking you an illegal opinion you may or may not be able to give. But what's your reaction to that?
No, I mean, I think if you look at this just as a logical, reasonable person, I mean, these businesses agreed to this, right? This is a contractual framework. And I think there's a lot less sympathy for these businesses when they've stepped up to the plate and said, yeah, this is something that we want to agree to. Here's our money. You've got to be diligent when you look at these contracts. You have to have someone that has experience look at these. And the goal is to have as much flexibility and as much indicia of ownership as you possibly can with respect to these software systems. So you have the flexibility to do what you want in a way that does not impose additional fees and burden on you. And so where do you draw the line between overregulation and consumer protection? And I don't know the answer to that question, but certainly I think the lightest touch possible is most likely preferable. You don't want to decimate the software industry and start imposing draconian regulations and rules on vendors and third-party providers. But I don't know where that line is.
Yeah, it's a good point. I had
consumer choice is a good thing generally, and that's why these what these regulators are trying to protect, both in the U.S. and sorry, my screen just went black there. There we go. Both in the U.S. and the EU, we're trying to give the consumers choice, and that's a great thing. And at Rimini Street, we are pro SAP. We love SAP software. We think it's some of the best ever written for businesses. We're just not a fan of some of the policies that they have for their customers. And we hope that they continue to do what they do very, very well, but that they will allow for more customer choice in the future. And Eric, you said that the future of SAP might somewhat be at stake here. I think there are some practitioners out there who will over time just change their footprint, and because they have the licenses, they can choose to use them or not, right? And I might say, well, I'm going to continue to use SAP for my core financials, my debits and credits and accounting and all that. But I might go look at a best of breed software for transportation management or warehouse management or human capital management or CRM. And I want to be able to put that together. We sometimes call that a composable strategy. We think that same composability ought to be available for any of the services related to running and supporting that software, as Marcus said, for implementation services, configuration services, professional services related to it. Support's just another one of those. How can I compose the right software and the right service partners to get the most value for my investment?
Yeah.
That's a great point. And we're seeing that a lot with our clients. We're not seeing many, if any, cases that I can think of where a client has said, screw SAP, we're done. We're moving a totally different direction. Most of them are saying either I'm staying put on ECC and I'm going to kick the can down the road and I'm going to roll the dice and take that chance and I'm going to milk the asset. I'm going to get as much equity or ROI out of that investment that I can. Or they're saying, okay, I'm going to move to S4HANA, but that footprint's going to be a lot smaller than ECC was. And I think that's a smart move because it's also just a natural human reaction to when you get screwed, why would you, or if you feel like you're getting screwed or being pressured, why would you then turn around and say, okay, I'm going to go all in and double down on SAP now and put all my eggs in that basket when they just got done, strong arm me into something that maybe I'm not ready to do or I shouldn't have to do right now. I'm not, because we don't have a lot of clients that are like, oh yeah, we're totally ready to go. We're ready to go S4HANA right now. Most of them are doing it because they have to. It's like, well, we have no choice. I mean, or they feel like they have no choice.
Yeah, and we hear that every once in a while. Well, why are you doing that? Oh, because our support is ending. Well, we can help with that, right?
Yeah.
If that's the only reason, then maybe you should take an alternative path.
Yeah, because you have a lifeline till 2040 at least, right? With your with S4HANA or
exactly.
With SAP ECC.
Well, and for S4HANA on-prem, let's remember that there are thousands of clients who have already licensed S4HANA with a perpetual license. They're operating it on-prem or on their chosen cloud provider, but they own the licenses. And so we are engaged with S4HANA clients as well. Some of them are in the same boat. In fact, it's kind of an interesting treatment of those who were most willing to go to the latest software early on with S4HANA, those clients that said, yeah, we'll do that. And they took their perpetual licenses and reinvested in S4HANA. And then SAP came out and said, well, the latest and greatest innovation capabilities, say in AI or Green Ledger and some of these other capabilities, were only going to be available if you subscribed and moved to the S4HANA cloud agreements.
Right. That's a great point of clarification. Thank you for bringing that up too. The S4HANA doesn't necessarily only mean cloud. You could also have the on-prem version as well.
And it doesn't necessarily mean subscription because you might have perpetual. We have to separate out the deployment decision from the licensing decision. And they don't always have to go together. But yeah, many of them still have perpetual licenses on on-prem deployments.
Well, that leads to an audience question here from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, how can organizations protect their customized IP when moving toward a cloud or subscription model?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. So in SAP parlance, you've mentioned clean core, which is an SAP phrase. And there is a migration called a greenfield migration, which says, let's not bring all of our customizations with us. Let's just kind of start over with a clean slate and try to eliminate or reduce the customizations. But that doesn't mean, clean core does not mean that you can't do something unique with the software. It just means you can't do it within the core code with the same techniques and capabilities and tool sets that were available with ECC. You need to build those with new tool sets and operate them on something called BTP, the Business Technology Platform, which has some subscription pricing associated with it. But it doesn't mean you absolutely have to give up customizations. You just can't do them in the same way that you did before. And the less customization you do, the easier it's going to be to continue to get the latest releases from SAP. However, as you have both said, there are really good reasons for customizing. The other option that SAP talks about is called a brownfield migration. Consider it this: you're moving house and you've got some really great furniture that you've developed that's perfect for your family, and you want to move that furniture into the new house. That's a brownfield migration. I'm going to take that great furniture with me to the new house, and I'll be running in a private single tenant instance of S/4HANA after that brownfield migration, which is going to have some cost implications with it and some future flexibility associated with it. If I do a greenfield, it says I'm not bringing any of my furniture with me. Once I get there, I'll figure out, if I need to go buy new furniture and what type is going to work in this new house. It's kind of a simple look at it. But those are sort of the options between greenfield and brownfield migrations. Customizations aren't necessarily gone. It's just a different way of handling it.
Yeah, and I think it's important that the industry stop conditioning buyers into thinking that customization is somehow this terrible, evil, rotten thing. That it's a very arrogant thing of us in the industry to think that if you don't adapt our clean core using our software that was built, even though you're right, you can do extensions and other ways of getting what you want without changing the core. But in some cases not. In some cases you do. If you really want it to do something it wasn't built to do, then you're going to have to decide, do you want to customize it, do you want to do a bolt-on, third party, whatever. And as a vendor, what vendors oftentimes do is they condition you or try to convince you that that's a bad idea. You're the problem. You don't want to change, and therefore you're the problem. We're not the problem. Our software's awesome. Right. It's best practice, whatever. And so I think that's the big challenge. Last question I have for you, Marcus, and then we'll wrap up. But this is actually a question from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, how can buyers best protect themselves from these contractual traps before they sign? So if I'm about to go through an S/4HANA migration, I'm about to sign a contract or whatever, or I just want to revisit my old ECC contract or my legacy vendor contract to see what my options are. How can I make sure I'm contractually above board and give myself the most flexibility possible?
Yeah, I mean, you've really got to look at this thing expansively when you're analyzing these contractual provisions and the restrictions that are in there, and you want to focus on flexibility. You look at SAP's track record, and you've got to look at SAP with a jaundiced eye. You look at things like the SAP v. Celonis case, where they're trying to restrict third-party usage of data process mining functionality. You look at the 2017 case of SAP v. Diageo, where that was the seed of this indirect usage scheme, and then you look at what they're trying to do today with their ability to not own customer data, but restrict and control your ability to use customer data, particularly with artificial intelligence. And so there very much is a consistent pattern here. And as you're looking at these contracts, you have to think about flexibility, future growth, minimizing fees, and giving yourself as many options as you can in giving yourself a dog in the fight if you've ever got to enforce these contracts or have a contractual provision imposed on you that's preventing you from utilizing the software the way you want to use it. And it's not so much about utilizing the software, it's about conducting your business the way that you think you need to conduct your business. That's the key, right? That's the key question when you're looking at these provisions. How is this restricting my ability to operate my business? And you've got to, if you start from there, that's a good way to keep yourself out of trouble.
Great points. Really appreciate you guys sharing this feedback, and appreciate all the audience questions and everything here today. How can we learn more about each of you? Marcus, what's the best way to get a hold of you, follow you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I would just open up Google, go to YouTube, search my name, Marcus Harris, software attorney. Taftlaw.com is another way to get a hold of me. I'd love to talk to any of your audience members or people listening about these issues and get them pointed in the right direction.
How about you, Scott, with Rimini Street? How do we get a hold of you? How do we follow you?
Yep. RiminiStreet.com. Best way to learn about the company. Scott Hayes on LinkedIn. I'm happy to engage with anyone anytime about these and continue this discussion. I think options are great.
All right. Thank you, Scott and Marcus. Appreciate your time here today. There was a great conversation. Really interesting topic. We're going to have to keep an eye on this one, a really close eye on this one, because I think this is a huge deal in the marketplace and something that's going to have long-lasting implications for buyers and sellers of enterprise technology for years to come. So we've got a lot more to cover. We're going to get into a conversation here in just a moment about the number one mistake you're likely making in your vendor proposal, vendor contract process. We're going to dive into that here in just a moment, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola.
I recently published my first book. It's called The Final Countdown, Strategies to Reach the Third Stage of Digital Transformation. And I wrote this book because I really wanted to find a concise way to share some of my knowledge around digital strategy and how to get started on a digital transformation journey. So in this book, I cover 3 different sections. I cover the people, process, and technology aspects of transformation, with the idea that it's meant to be a starting point, a launching pad for organizations and team members that are going through digital transformations. So I encourage you to buy this book. You can get it electronically, you can get it paperback, or you can get it in hard copy, as I'm holding here in front of you. You can get it by going to thefinalcountdown.com. You can also search for it on Amazon if you shop at Amazon. Otherwise, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. Love to hear your feedback on this book as well. So I hope you check it out and hope you enjoy.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. Today we are going to feature a YouTube video from Eric's YouTube titled Why Your Software Vendor Proposal is All Wrong. In this video, Eric breaks down why so many vendor proposals are unrealistic and what transformation leaders need to watch out for when evaluating new systems. Let's jump into the video.
One of the service offerings we provide to clients is to help clients through their digital strategy and software selection process. And when we go through that process, we're always amazed at how often the client receives proposals that are completely unrealistic, aren't going to match reality at all, and are likely to lead to cost and time and resource overruns that weren't expected. However, it doesn't need to be this way. If you go into these projects with your eyes wide open and evaluate with a clear set of eyes, then you can actually create a project plan and budget that makes a lot of sense. But in the meantime, you have to recognize the proposal and the budgetary estimate you get from your vendor is highly likely to be orders of magnitude off base, not because they don't know what they're doing or not because they're necessarily trying to lie to you, but because there's several other factors that come into play, and that's what I'll talk about here in today's video. And if you'd like to learn more about the software selection process and how you can be successful in your evaluation process, including selecting the right software and selecting the right system integrator, be sure to check out our Software Buyer's Guide. It's a guide of best practices and lessons that we have from having helped so many clients through their software evaluation processes. You can download that by scanning the QR code right here or go to the links below. The first reason why your vendor proposal is all wrong is because there are incorrect and unrealistic assumptions. Oftentimes, a software vendor is going to assume the best. They're going to assume that you will make decisions quickly. They'll assume that your data is nice and tidy. They'll assume that you've got the integration and the architecture all figured out. They assume that when they train the trainers within your organization, those trainers are going to know exactly what to do to go train the masses on how to use the software. There's a lot of assumptions like these that are either completely unrealistic or it just doesn't fit your business and your situation. And so that's why it's so important that when you get a proposal from a software vendor, you want to make sure you take it with a grain of salt, because chances are pretty high that the assumptions are unrealistic, and that's okay. But what you want to do is you want to work through those assumptions and modify the proposal in a way that reflects the reality of what you think your organization can or can't do. And this is a tricky nuance because, again, the software vendors are going to assume the best. They're going to assume the best case scenario, and that's rarely the case. And that's a big part of why these projects struggle so much and why they tend to go over budget and take too long. The other reason why vendor proposals are so misleading and can lead to cost and time overruns is because what they propose is typically an incomplete plan. Not because it's not complete in terms of what they need to do to design, build, and deploy technology, but because that's only one small part of your overall transformation. There's a lot more to your project than just designing, developing, and deploying software. However, as a program manager and as an organization that's responsible for the entire change initiative, you have to look at the things that the vendor's not going to do, and you have to add a time and a cost element to that, and you have to make sure that those factors also integrate back to the technology plan. So for example, if we know it's going to take us a certain amount of time to migrate our data, or it's going to take a certain amount of time for us to go through the change management process to redesign our organization or to define our standard business processes going forward, that inevitably means that we're going to extend and prolong the time it takes the software vendor to do their work. Again, it's not because they're necessarily doing a bad job or they can't do it faster. They probably can do it faster. But the point is your business has to change. And there's a lot of assumptions you need to work through to ensure that you are actually able to do the things you need to do to make the project work. So when you get a vendor proposal, the best way to look at it is to say this is a project plan for one work stream within a broader program. And now we need to go through and define what does the broader program look like? What are the different work streams and activities and how do they all tie together? And spoiler alert, chances are pretty high it's going to extend your timeline. It's going to add to your budget. And that's okay. You might as well figure that out now and be realistic up front. But the key here is that when you get those proposals, they're typically incomplete and don't have all those other pieces that you need to make the program complete. Technical deployments are always going to happen faster than a business transformation. And the reason for that is because technology is fairly cut and dry. It either works or it doesn't. You configure certain things, you design it, you test it, and you can have a fully functioning, working technology that's beautifully designed, built, and deployed, but your people aren't using it, or your business isn't adopting it, or you're not getting the business value from it. Those are two very different scenarios. And typically organizations want more than just technology deployed. They want business value, they want people using it, they want the processes to improve, et cetera, et cetera. So when getting a vendor proposal, you have to recognize that even if you're working with a system integrator who says that, yes, we can do change management for you, yes, we can do training and communication, yes, we can do process reengineering, chances are very high, and I'd say 99% of the time, those system integrators, even the big ones, are myopically focused on designing and building technology. When they talk about change management, they're thinking more about how do I train people to complete transactions in a system? And chances are very high that your people need a lot more help with change than that, especially now with technology changing so quickly, and that divide between how fast technology is changing and human and organizational inability to change that fast, that's creating more pressure on change management. It's creating more pressure on organizations to figure out a way to move and keep up with the pace of change of technology. Not to say it can't be done, but it's to say that chances are extremely high that the software vendor is going to build the technology a lot faster than your business is going to be able to consume it. And so you need to be sure that, again, you reconcile those two things, those two conflicts of interest there in terms of business and technology transformation. Another reason why vendor proposals are typically so wrong and so far off base is because the sales reps and the sales industry in general has a conflict of interest with your organization. And that may sound strange to say, but hear me out. What I mean by that is a software vendor sales rep is highly incentivized to close a deal. And to close a deal, you can't freak people out too much. You can't tell them the complete reality of what they're about to get themselves into because it might jeopardize the sale of the software. And we've seen situations where a sales rep has been more forthcoming than the industry typically is. And I've seen deals fall through because the client got skittish and decided it was too much risk and didn't want to do it. So that's every sales rep's nightmare, is to have a deal fall through because they were too forthcoming or they gave up too much information about the risks involved. And so there's a natural human tendency to downplay the risks when you're trying to close a deal. And it's not just closing the deal, it's the timing of closing the deal. Sales reps want to make their numbers. They've got quotas, they've got commissions they want to hit, numbers they want to hit. And so it's really important that organizations recognize that there's a conflict of interest there, and ensuring that the sales rep closes the deal as fast as possible, sells you as much software and services as possible in a way that doesn't necessarily freak you out or scare you out of wanting to do the project altogether. So that sales conflict of interest is something that's very real, and it's just the way it is. But the key here is we need to look through that and look past that to rationalize and validate and create a plan that makes a lot more sense for us as an organization. So I hope this provides some guidance on how to navigate the whole misleading nature of software vendor proposals. If you'd like to learn more, be sure to download our software buyer's guide. It teaches you some lessons and tips on how to select the right software, but also how to navigate the whole proposal process and being realistic about your planning process as well. So I hope you found this information useful, and hope you have a great day.
All right, so that was Eric discussing why your software vendor proposal is all wrong. We'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this video, what questions you had, and we will answer those in the future. If you'd like to check out more of Transformation Ground Control, you can head to transformationgroundcontrol.com to check out all past 243 episodes in the meantime. We also post weekly on Wednesdays, so you'll be able to watch a new episode every single week. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.